Hi, my name is Judy Higgins, and I am a fifth grade science teacher in Lawrence, Massachusetts. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes together talking about some tools and strategies that we can use to most efficiently cope with the unfinished learning that we will be looking at come hopefully August or September, when our students are either back in the classroom in some configuration or working with them on Zoom. So we are looking at facilitating productive discussions, the key to developing a robust plan for unfinished learning. I am passionate about student discourse in all forms. I think it is one of the most important things that we can do for our students. Help them become good talkers, good listeners, both real important components of learning. So when we started as a school dealing with unfinished learning, we thought a lot about how we're going to teach this. And our district had us take a look at an article that talked about what had gone on after Hurricane Katrina. How had they coped with unfinished learning? And what they had done was simply taken the units that had been missed, whatever had been missed in those months not in school, and first taught those. That did not work. The learning was not accelerated. The unfinished learning went on and on and on, and it was problematic. So one of the things that we talked about was, how are we going to do this? So today we'll talk about, first of all, what should we teach? We know that it didn't work to just simply go over the units, but we have to figure out what's missing so we can move forward. We'll also talk a lot about how to use discussion to diagnose what's missing. What do they get? What do they need? And I think that this can be such an efficient way to diagnose rather than endless pre-assessments, endless grading those pre-assessments. What can we do right there? So many opportunities for formative assessments when we are listening to our students. Can also use discussion to accelerate the learning. We've got some learning to make up. So every minute that we spend with our students, we need to be efficient. I'm going to give you so many tools that I have utilized over the years to support academically productive talk. What we decided as a school after looking at the Katrina studies was that we would not simply teach the missed units, but we would first dive into the grade level before us to understand what went on there, and then look at, I teach fifth grade, so I know my fifth grade units pretty well, but I didn't know exactly what would they have gotten in fourth grade. So I spent some time both on my own and with the fourth grade teachers looking at what was it that you were teaching them. And we sat together and identified what were critical skills that they had to have in order to understand the unit that I was going to be teaching. And waiting until the end of the year to teach those units, not trying to teach them at the beginning of the year, moving at my usual pace, and then being prepared when it was time for Unit 7, Unit 8, Unit 9. I was prepared to fill in those gaps. What I found as I worked with the fourth grade team, the third grade team, and looking at my own curriculum, science Science is really going to be, I believe, relatively easy for this because I looked at, in most of my last 3 units, we all agreed that we were teaching a lot of the same concepts, just at different levels. So realizing the 5th grade, we were digging into that concept a little bit deeper. I found a lot of vocabulary that I found there was an assumption that they understood that vocabulary. They had spent some time, would have spent some time on that in 4th grade, would not have gotten that same time in 5th grade. So I needed to make sure that I was prepared. And I believe that utilizing discussion is such a great way for students to learn vocabulary. Also, as I talked about before, pre-assessment is going to be crucial. So I am not assuming that they know things, but I'm also not assuming they don't know things either. So thinking about these 3 things, what would they have learned last year? What will they learn this year? Where are the gaps? There's a lot to say on this slide, but I found it a really great slide, and I just want to quickly talk about all the ways that we can use discourse to both diagnose and accelerate. One of the things that I miss the most about seeing my kids in person and seeing them only on Zoom meetings, I don't get nearly the discussion that I got back in the classroom. We're getting there. We're definitely getting there. But talk provides such a window into, what are you thinking? Do you get it? Do you not get it? And that's such a robust thing when you can create a classroom in which there's just discussing going on all the time. You're understanding where they are. You're understanding where did you get that? I don't understand. And then as you question, I see where we need to go. Also, supporting language development. This is going to be such a key opportunity for them to either learn vocabulary, practice vocabulary. Also, as we get into more sophisticated talking, encouraging them to reason with evidence. Starting to have a culture where questioning, how do you know that? And then developing that as a culture so students are asking each other, what do you mean by that? Show me where you found that. I'm not sure that's true. So there's so much of, in the practices of science, having to prove, having to hypothesize. All those things cannot happen without discourse. The last one I really like, in both the social skills, but even bigger, the risk-taking. Once you develop a climate where talking is encouraged, talking is supported, you will get students who won't be afraid to ask what they might think of as a stupid question. When you develop a climate where all questions are exciting, all questions are welcome, students become such caretakers of their own learning because they understand that it's their responsibility. Nobody can read your mind. If you don't know what's going on, please speak up. You've got all kinds of peers who are working on the same thing. So all of these are such great ways that you're not going to waste time. We're not going to get to the final assessment and only then figure out, oh, they really did not get this. This is going on all the time. Okay, so where do I begin? This does not happen overnight. And I want you to, I'm giving a lot of tools in a little bit of time. And these are 9 talk moves that came from the Talk Science primer. And they're talked about a lot. Most of them will be familiar to you. And I really encourage you to practice these with your students, not all at once. I moved through particularly the ones that I felt were more sophisticated and required a little bit more risk. I would spend some time where we just practice that one. And I spend a lot of time at the beginning of the year creating that culture of discourse, creating that culture of risk-taking, creating that culture of talk to each other. I'm not going to carry this whole load. I'm going to go through each of the talk moves, give some examples of ways that I've used them, but again, encouraging you, take one at a time. So you become comfortable and they become comfortable. So the first one, talk move 1, the goal is to get students to share, first and foremost, expand and clarify their own thinking. Often students, when you first get them to talk, they're trying to form it. And that's such a beautiful time to let them know that's okay to be talking at that stage. Some of the things that you can do, 1, partner talk. I'm sure a lot of you do turn and talk. That is a much lower risk for students. I can turn and I can tell my partner what I'm thinking. I also make a habit of, when we're doing partner talk or group talk, making sure that I am walking around and sitting with students. So they're used to that. They know that somebody's going to be listening. And you'll often find at the beginning, as you go sit, they're doing nothing or talking about something else, and they'll suddenly start talking. That's a great way to start that process. They know it's always going to happen. Turn and talk. Tell your partner what you think. Second one is writing as think time. Organize your thoughts. That will help a student feel calm, think about what they do know, and know that they have something to refer to. And I'm going to talk about that when we get to our skill building and at the very end when we do our whole class discourse, the importance of taking that time for them to prepare and write out. Last one, wait time. This was absolutely one of the hardest things I ever did. Wait time felt like hours to me, and it was really hard for me not to jump in. And I learned, I had to count in my head. Years and years ago, when I was first teaching science in Seattle, I had an observation by my principal. And she was great. She really did a really great job with observations and gave a lot of good feedback. But one of the most interesting pieces of feedback that I ever received was, well, every time you told students to take a minute to think, and you did this 5 times, and you gave them an average of 18 seconds. That felt like a minute to me. Silence with thinking time. And I'll never forget that. And I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot of the power of being quiet and truly letting them think. And they learn a lot from that. I've had students say to me when we have our whole class discourse, when they're filling out the reflection sheet, and one of the questions that you can choose is, what was the hardest thing? And they talked about at the beginning when nobody was talking and we all had to wait for someone to start. But it works. It really does work. The next one is, again, helping students to share, expand, and clarify. Any of these questions. Can you say more? What do you mean? Can you give an example? These are all phrases that should become part of any discourse that's going on in your classroom. And one of the ways that this can be used in a really non-threatening manner is when your students are perhaps sitting in their small groups and maybe they're working on their picture thinking, or they're doing their reading, or they're starting to talk about their investigation. And for you to start asking these kinds of questions so they get used to that. That becomes the expectation that anything that they say as a scientist, you need to explain. You need to clarify. And it's very exciting when you start hearing them say that to each other. And that's something that you can feed them, where I would turn to another student and say, do you understand what they're trying to tell you? The student says no. And I will literally say, well, say to them, what do you mean by that? And it feels very forced at first, and it is, and that's okay, but that's how they learn. Next move, talk move 3. Again, we're still working on these first 3, same goal. You want students to learn to share. You want students to learn to clarify. So are you saying? This is such an important talk move because, one, it's so respectful to show a student that you are listening carefully and you really want to know. It's also a great place to get a hold of a misconception, because rather than me jumping in and saying, oh, no, I don't think you've got that right, you're giving them the opportunity, because I'm saying it back, and they can immediately, possibly say, no, that's not what I meant. Great. So again, those are those formative assessments right then and there. I get it. Oh, okay, they did know. I don't have to panic. I don't have to correct them yet. They did know. And it becomes more sophisticated when you can work on them. Do that with each other. Practice. And take the time in your day, even though it's packed and there's going to be a lot of pressure with unfinished learning. But this time up front is going to help so much. As they get used to it, it becomes so much more efficient. And you will be so excited as you see and hear your students become so independent with these talk moves. Talk move 4, rephrase or repeat. This is a great move that is going to set up the expectation in your classroom that you listen to each other. In 5th grade, and probably most grades, but I've spent the most of my time teaching 5th and 6th grade, everybody wants to talk, and they have far more trouble listening. So listening is such an important skill. And once they learn to listen, they will realize how much they learn. And when you have a whole class discourse, it needs to be productive. So you don't want several students repeating the same thing that someone else said. Rephrase and repeat. This is such a great practice move where you're asking them. Repeat it, or better yet, put it into your own words. That really embeds the learning. It also will help them, let me really think and process. What did he or she say? How can I rephrase that? Asking for evidence or reasoning. And this is something that they should be learning in all other subjects. Why do you think that? Where did you get that information? What's your evidence? Going back into the text to find that. And for science, it's so crucial that they have that kind of language to talk about data, to talk about a hypothesis, to really help them understand that science is looking at something, testing something, drawing conclusions from data. So all of these questions are so important for them to learn, so important for them to feel comfortable answering, asking each other, and helping them have the confidence to take a risk, but also understanding if I'm going to make a statement, I need to be prepared to talk about where did I get the information to make that statement? And that, is there anything in the text? Well, here's my student reader. Those students should be so eager to go back into the student reader to prove, there it is, it says it right there. Okay, talk move 6. Again, you're working on really deepening their reasoning. And this is such an exciting skill because it teaches students to have productive and kind arguments, and understanding that challenging someone is not a mean thing to do. It's an exciting thing to do. It's a learning thing to do. And I think that so many of our students feel, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to upset somebody, or I'm really scared when somebody says that to me. And to help students understand, this is an exciting thing that you can do. This is how we are going to learn more. And this makes us think. Does it always work that way? Well, I don't know. Let me think. Let me think, because maybe I do have an example. And that's been one of the things that has been exciting and interesting to me with teaching students who are in their houses, where they can start pushing themselves to think outside. Does friction work the same way in the classroom? Is there a way that that works in your house? And them to understand, oh, I get it. I do get this, and I can give examples. And looking at and making connections with other students, what's going on with their investigation. Is that the same thing? Are they getting a similar result? Why is that? What's going on? As a teacher, those are such good conversations, because I often throw those out simply as challenges. You might not know that right now. I'm asking you to think about it. Come back to me. Talk to your family at home. Talk to another student. Once we finish the investigation tomorrow, think about. And that is encouraging that thinking. That, boy, do we need that. Top move 7, thinking with others, agree, disagree, why. Same thing of helping students have a discourse that's respectful, and it's okay to disagree. It can be amazing to disagree. One of the best, we were having a whole class discussion, and there was a student who was very confident, who always talked quite a bit in whole class discussions. And and this was towards the end of the year, so we had done a lot of whole class discourse, and they were all pretty comfortable. And this student who was not as comfortable talking really felt strongly that the other student was making an incorrect statement. And it was an amazing thing to watch, because that student was kind of like pointing at something. And another student said, well, tell him. And it was such an amazing disagreement. And he had the proof in the student reader, and he showed an image. And he said, well, I don't think what you're saying is correct, because in the student reader, look at the image. And the confident student looked at the image, and then said, you're right, I'm wrong. It was such a great moment, because I had said nothing. And it was all them. And it was so remarkable how the student, the confident student, was great, was absolutely great about saying that is absolutely correct. And it was a really powerful moment, particularly in our reflection, that somebody had the bravery to disagree, and it changed the whole course of discussion. So helping students respectfully, that's one of the statements that the students use. I respectfully disagree, and then talk about why. And this student was ready with evidence as to why they disagreed. Add on another, thinking with others. This is a great one to start with, because when you have somebody start a conversation, it is often easy for another student to then also talk, because they got an idea. I sort of see now where we're going with this, so they can build on. And even if it's just a little bit, and then as they get more sophisticated, can anyone give an example of what Jamal is talking about? Can you just add on? And that leads to really powerful discourse. And then students thinking with others, explaining what someone else means. This is where you are taking somebody else's thoughts, reflecting on those thoughts, and then making it your own. And we know that when you can put your thoughts, give voice to your thoughts, you are way more apt to remember. And when you are doing that with a group, and a group has the opportunity to push you, all of those things are going to help you remember those concepts. And if it's a misconception, there's that opportunity for teacher peers to address that misconception. Or where you're explaining what someone else means also gives the opportunity for that person to say, no, that wasn't what I meant. Where that's such a powerful moment for a student to listen. They're not understanding me, and I need to correct that. Next, we're going to talk about diagnostic tools. So I have my work cut out for me in August, September, whether it's online learning or in-school learning. I need to figure out, what do they know? I have some ideas of the vocabulary and the gaps that need to be filled in, but I don't want to assume anything. I want to be as efficient as possible. So I learned about, I took a course on helping English language learners become adept at discourse. And they talked a lot about using what they know to understand where they are. Draw talk is really powerful, where you can simply say to a student, this was an example, draw, what do you know about the water cycle? Write down, label, draw anything that you know. Give them a certain amount of time. So you can see from this student, there's already a lot that they know, that they understand about the water cycle. You can also see that there's not a lot of vocabulary that they have attached to what's going on in the water cycle. That is so helpful for me because I understand I don't have to teach or reteach this student everything about the water cycle. I have to help this student attach some vocabulary. One of the ways that you can use this is to do this first and then have students present them to each other and discuss it together. And you can have students, if you're hearing something, can you fill something in there? Am I partnered up with a student who has some vocabulary to attach to these pictures? You can sit in on some of these discussions, but there's a lot of information that you can get in a really non-threatening way, and you can get that information right away to understand. And even if I wasn't doing necessarily unfinished learning, this is going to give me a lot of information at the beginning of any unit. I used to think, now I think this is one that we've heard about this a lot, and I have used this in different ways. I've used it for looking at right after an investigation. Did they get it? I have had sometimes, particularly at the beginning when I was teaching, where we would get clear to the conclusion. And as I'd be sitting with a group, listening to them to discuss their conclusion, I would realize they have not gotten the point at all of this investigation. Well, shame on me that it took all the way to there to know this, but I had a lot of years of learning ahead of me. The way that I used this was at the end of an investigation when they were preparing for writing their conclusion. And I wanted to get some sense of what did they get out of this? Did they get the big idea? Are they prepared to write the conclusion? This was an investigation where they planted seeds in soil, in 1 cup of soil, and then the other cup had cotton balls, and they watered it the same. They all had sun, and they saw that both plants grew, but the plant that was planted in cotton balls was yellow. It didn't grow as tall. And this, I used to think plants needed soil to grow. Now I think they will grow without soil, but will not be as green without nutrients. So she got it. She really, really got it. She was able to write a good conclusion based on that. This can be used in so many ways. This can be used before and after a reading. Very powerful after some sort of discussion, whether it's a group discussion, a partner discussion, a whole class discussion, to, again, understand what did they get out of it. And it's an exciting thing to point out to students how my thinking has changed. I'm growing, I'm learning. Concept maps, these are such a terrific diagnostic tool. Beginning of a unit, the end of a unit, the middle of a unit, they can be used in so many ways. And this was a tool that I've used in all different ways, and I've grown in my ability to help guide the students through it in a most efficient way. I used to do probably too much of showing them an exemplar, and that shut down a lot of thinking, I realized. And when I now can give it to a team or a group, I often let them do things as a team or group, because we're not only seeing what they know, but there's a lot of discussion going on. Why did you put that? I don't understand what weather has to do with climate. So you can walk around as it's happening and encourage a lot of discourse about why. What is that? Can anybody else add on to that? So it's a really good team activity. It's also a really good activity for them to keep in their notebooks to see how much they've learned in a unit. Also, one of my favorite uses for it is for them to make those connections, understanding that so much of what we're doing, it's all connected. And I'm talking about something in Unit 6, perhaps, that I also was introduced to in Unit 2. That's such a great way to help students understand science and all the connections that there are, and to come back to vocabulary and realize all the different ways that the vocabulary is connecting the concept. So helping you, what do they already know? What do they need to know? Now I've got an action plan. This will be a very helpful diagnostic tool at the beginning of those units that you get to, where you know you're going to have unfinished learning. Now we're going to talk about some skill building tools. And this is absolutely 100% my favorite part of teaching science, and I would not be doing this if I hadn't started teaching with the No Atom curriculum. I had taught in Seattle. I taught a completely different curriculum, and there wasn't a discussion component. We discussed things, but there wasn't the focus on it. And I was very intimidated to try this. It just sounded like a really scary thing that I had to corral the whole class, figure out a way to manage them having discussions. And I had to just finally convince myself, you got to jump into it, because I watched another teacher do it, and she was brave enough to do it and let it be messy and let me watch. And I was aware of the messiness, but I could see this is something really important and needs to be done. The way that I set this up was with using the inner and outer circle, where you'd have the inner circle would be the ones discussing, the outer circle would be the ones observing, and then they would change. So every time, we used to have this probably about once a week in the regular classroom. And I started to make some scaffolds to help them do a better job, to help me organize things better. So looking at how was I going to make the greatest use of our time together. So I made a 3-page packet that we utilized every single time. And I'm going to go through each page of that with you, tell you why I use this, how it worked. Start out with the pre-discourse huddle. And that was a time where they would take at the beginning of class to figure out, what am I going to talk about? That was so helpful and changed everything. When they had that time to organize their thoughts, they could sit down with their student reader, and usually I give them a graphic organizer to fill out as they're doing their reading. So they could use their graphic organizer and they would think, what do I want to talk about? They would make a goal every week. And you'll notice on this one of the talking moves, my goal from last week was to add on to what somebody said. I chose this goal because I never do that. So that was a skill that they were working on. They plan how many times do they want to talk. And the goal is always everybody has to talk. To be a successful discourse, 100% of your inner circle has to talk. That's so powerful because they do everything in their power to support each other and to help everybody talk. So it becomes, you've got that group goal going on. I feel prepared because I did the following. That's that accountability piece. When they can write down, I did the reading, I finished the graphic organizer, I helped someone on my team. So now they've got that. So I can check my graphic organizer, I put my notes on the huddle sheet, I feel more confident. So they bring this with them to the circle. This is for the outer circle. Those are the people observing. And I came up with this because I found that the inner circle was going well. The inner circle, they were discussing, they were using their scientific language, they were adding on, but the outer circle was not doing well. They were talking to each other, they were falling asleep, they were not paying attention. So I knew we need something else. I added this outer circle observations and feedback. They are assigned a partner, they're sort of sitting behind their partner, and they meet with their partner for just a quick minute so they can exchange, what are your goals? And this is their accountability piece. They've got some questions that they'll be responsible for answering at the end. I have a task, therefore I pay attention. I can also learn some discourse skills. I can also maybe feel more prepared when it's my turn to go in there. This is the reflection at the end. This is such an important piece that I really enjoyed watching how quiet and focused they would be filling this out. There's a lot of questions on here. I generally would let them pick 2 questions to answer. There's usually not a whole lot of time at the end. I generally have each group talk for 15 minutes, then they switch. So by the time they get to the post talk, there isn't a lot of time. The reasons for this, as my quote says, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on the experience. And they take that very seriously, and they particularly enjoy things like, what was the best part? What was the most difficult part? That's an important thing. That's where they can do their goal setting. What do I want to do next time? I generally will give a couple of minutes. Anybody want to share? And it's amazing to me how many students want to share out. So this whole class discourse takes the entire time. I let that be the entire class. Finally, we have the discourse frames. Those are in your No Adam curriculum. These are incredibly helpful for them to lean on to start sentences, think about, particularly for English learners. So often, I know what I want to say, but I'm not sure how to say it. Is this the right way to say it? Well, that gives me a good idea. Certainly helps me when I have difficult things to write. We spend time, again, at the beginning. I usually put this in their packet at the beginning of the year so they can refer to those when they're planning what they're going to say. Finally, wrapping up with, this is such an old quote, and it's so powerful to me because when you look at, first of all, how little they're learning from listening to me, 20%, how much, 70% of what we discuss, and then 95% of what we teach others. And when you look at all these opportunities for discourse, there's so much teaching of each other. I'm not carrying the load. They are helping each other, correcting each other, challenging each other. And it's so much fun when I feel like my biggest job as a teacher is pointing out these things, pointing out that you just taught someone something so important. You just helped somebody understand. That is worth more than all the chatter coming from me at the front of the room. So I hope that this is helpful in terms of thinking about how to use your time efficiently. I really encourage you, make sure that you're not overwhelmed by these, you're picking them and delving into them a little bit at a time, practicing them. I've been at this a long time, and my greatest learning was always to take my time. Don't rush through teaching them something new. So thank you so much for your time.